Hey, what is going on, everybody? My name is Jared Tachi. Today is a special video because I am bringing to you a guest, which you see here, Miles, which is the owner, CEO, the man of Light Harvest Solar. We are going to dive into what I am using on my tiny house because it is going to be a fully off-grid, fully operational tiny house on a trailer. But what is really nice about Miles and his team is they also do multiple off-grid kits. So stay tuned for this entire video because I really feel that this is going to be super educational. Here we go. Neither one of us is in a bikini right now or dancing, so this might not get a lot of views. We are going to try and be as informational and educational as possible, and I think it's going to be very beneficial to the people that actually want to sit here and listen to what you have to say. How does that sound?
Yeah, great. You never know. We might start dancing.
We might.
If people get lucky.
Miles and I have talked several times about my kit for my personal tiny house. What has been great is Miles and his team have been my go-to people for any of my off-grid, vans that I have done or the Jeep Gladiator that I did. Miles, kind of just maybe give an elevator pitch of what Light Harvest Solar does. What do you guys provide?
We provide off-grid kits and the expertise needed to sort of decide what it is you need. Very custom. So, we talk to you, or we've got a questionnaire that helps us to sort of determine what it is your project requirements are. Tend to go back and forth a little bit, talk to you about what your options are, design a system with the components that you decide or we decide that are the best for you, put an estimate together to get you the estimate, and then if you want to go for it, then we put together a kit for you, do the hard stuff, like sizing the wires, sizing the lugs, sizing the fuses, sizing the breakers, sizing the solar modules, inverters, batteries. We just go through the process of figuring out what your project needs.
You are a huge benefit for somebody like myself, which I can build anything at any time, especially with wood, and I'm still learning metal a little bit. When it comes to like electrical, I am so confused with it. 12 volt, 24 volt, 48 volt, 120 volt, 240 volt. Like it can go up and up and up in crazy amounts. Like, how do I switch over to this, to that? And that is where you come in and your team comes in. I want to make sure everybody knows that is watching this, like, you're not giving me any special treatment. Anybody can call Light Harvest Solar or fill out your questionnaire and you can get everything you need, exactly what we're doing here today. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. Not everybody has this skill set. People have their own specialized thing, and this just happens to be one of them that requires you to either know what you're doing or educate yourself to what you're doing or get somebody who knows what they're doing. It's really hard to do it right. I mean, you might get through it, but any little thing that you don't do right can end up being a bit of a headache.
I appreciate you, and I think everybody here is going to appreciate you as well. Before we go into my kit, can we talk about a little bit the differences in all-in-one kit, which is what Light Harvest Solar does sell, versus maybe a 12-volt kit, which is what you would typically see in maybe a van or a small vessel or something like that, and then to maybe what I'm going to be using, which is a 48-volt kit. I skipped right over 24. Really, kind of what are the differences between the three?
Let's start with the all-in-ones. They're the newest thing on the market, and they're quite nice for the most part because they easy it up a bit. You don't have to do stuff like make wires, cut them, do lugs, certainly size the wires. There's just a lot of stuff that's done for you. So they're easy. They are coming on pretty strong, but they're not always what you want simply because they're still kind of in the small segment. If you're going to power much above a tiny house, you start to move into other stuff.
Just as a side note, that little Aspen right there that's behind you powered my last van build that I did, which was a Ford Econoline. That thing is fantastic. It's got a 2000 watt inverter. It was easily able to power everything in my van. We can go to bigger kits, all-in-ones. You're selling them, I think, soon, if not already. The next iteration would be like a 12 volt kit that somebody usually builds, right?
Sure.
And you cater a lot to the DIY crowd. I'm doing my own electrical kit for my tiny house, which I'm scared to be bejesus of. I'm super scared. Sure. That's why you do what you do. So what do you do for the 12 volt kits?
Okay, so 12 volts very applicable to a vehicle, right? Because you've already got a 12 volt system in there. You've got most of the stuff standardized to 12 volts. You know, modern lithium batteries are plenty capable of powering stuff at just about anything at 12 volts. If you're in a vehicle in general, the best way to go is, and there's some debate, you know, and mostly it's pros and cons. I tend to be very strong towards the standardization of 12. If you're going to use 12 volt, if you've got a vehicle, you've got a 12 volt alternator, you've got 12 volt lights, you've got 12 volt everything, just go with 12 volts, unless you're going to build something really, really big. If you've got like a schoolie or something where you can fit a lot of solar up on there, you might consider changing to a 48 volt system. But I typically, unless there's a really good reason, which there's not that many, I don't do 24 volt systems. I either want the standardization of the 12 volt, so I can do all that and make it easy on myself, or I want the sort of optimization of the advantages of 48 volt. Because with 24 volt, you lose your 12 volt standardization and you don't get the full advantages of going 48. Long and short of it is a 12 volt system is going to be a smaller system that's in a vehicle. Above and beyond that, you'll probably want to move to a 48.
I was very back and forth on what I was going to do for my tiny house, which is a 48. I almost switched to a 24. I got on the phone with you because you're my go-to guy, and you were like, dude, do not switch to a 24. You were very like adamant about just sticking with my 48. Yeah. It just makes more sense to you.
We might get a lot of comments about 24 being the cat's meow or whatever, but yeah, the long short of it is 12 or 48. Just 24 is not, it loses the advantages of 12, it loses the advantages of 48. It's slightly better than 12 in some ways. It's not really better, it's slightly better in some limited circumstances, maybe, to 48. But in general, 24 is not the way to go.
If somebody is purchasing an entire 12 volt kit van wise for you, or sure, 48 or whatever, I mean, you sell any size kit, it doesn't matter. Sure. And I was to do it myself, saving a lot of money, right? So let's just say a standard, you know, 300 or 400 amp hour battery system through Light Harvest Solar, my guess is anywhere between 8 to 10,000, depending on components.
I mean, that's high side. You know, okay. It tends to be, let's see, a Sprinter with a single big 400 watt solar panel, and then maybe 300 or 400. You know, maybe in the $5,000-6,000 range. We usually do 3,000 watt inverters, alternator charging, all the wires, plugs, hardware, AC/DC distribution. Yeah, you might be in the 5 to 7 sort of range, 6 to 8, something like that, depending.
5 to 7, and that person puts it together themselves. However, what Light Harvest Solar does is you provide them a wire diagram that is like the cat's meow. I'm going to take your line there. Whereas it's just like, it breaks everything down for you. And yeah, maybe at first glance, you're like, what the heck is this thing? But when you start laying it out, like how I did my first one, again, you gave me the wire diagram, is I put it on a big piece of table, like a big piece of plywood. And I literally put everything out and I ran the wires like dry, like nothing was linked up. And when I started doing that, everything started clicking and making sense to me. Is it really
having a good drawing? Yeah, it's totally key. Totally key. You got to have a good schematic drawing.
Yeah,
it comes with our kits.
Okay, I wanted to make sure that is very known, because that is the biggest part of your entire kit. 5 to 7,000. Now, what that saves people is the labor costs, which can be 1 to 1.5 times, maybe even 2 times, depending on who's doing it, right? If you're looking at maybe 7,000 high end, that could be 15, 16, 20,000 as a professional built kit. So
installed, yeah, installation. I mean, these days, everybody's so booked up, they can charge whatever they want, it seems like.
So that is why I really drew. I know that took a lot longer than what everybody wanted, but that is really why I love shopping at Light Harvest Solar, because of the customer service. You guys are some of the best in the business. It's big for me. And Miles obviously is a good friend of mine. Miles, we're going to talk about my kit now, because I'm tired. I'm tired of plugging you. I'm not paying Miles. This is a massive favor he's doing for me. I appreciate it. Miles is not paying me. I'm not getting any money, nor am I actually getting any trade out of this. I am paying you, Miles. Is that right? I'm paying.
Yeah, I guess. I guess. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You are definitely paying me.
I'm paying you for the product. I just wanted to make that clear for everybody. I will say, when we get into the batteries, I was gifted my batteries from a certain company, but we will get into that.
Let's start with some limiting factors. That's really what's going to dictate how you deal with things. It's the limiting factors. And there's a couple limiting factors here. One is going to be your roof size, right? You can't put more solar than is on your roof. So that is one of the very first things you got to know is how big is my roof? How much solar can I fit in there? That's going to dictate your lifestyle, how much generation you have. And then the second limiting factor tends to be budget. And that would be a little bit more of a talk around the batteries because they tend to be the most expensive things, right? Are you looking for more of a budget or more of a performance thing? So roof size, budget, and what they need to get done.
With me, I gave you my roof size, which is a 24 by 8 foot trailer with a pitch. I have a single shed style pitch, is a 2 to 12 pitch, so it's a little bit bigger than 8 feet. It's about 100 inches, however, 24 feet long. Budget, I am okay, I guess, sharing my budget, but I don't care what my budget is because I know what it's going to take to have the biggest, most BA system out there or product out there. And I am just that kind of person where I want to have the biggest and best out there. So Miles knows that my budget is kind of like, whatever.
We're looking to get the job done more than we are getting at the bottom end of what will get the job done. Step one for you, which was, like you said, measuring the roof. How many solar panels we can get on there. When we did the math, it ends up being, approximately 288 inches by 96. I had a few ideas in mind about which solar panels we wanted to use, but the idea is you want to fill your whole roof, right, with solar panels. You don't want excess on the sides or the top particularly, because you want to get as much power as you can get. Mm-hmm. So the first solar panels we decided on ended up what I think my notes say 2580 watts because they were just too big in one direction to maximize the amount of roof you had. It was not the best size. Then we went back and we said, okay, that's not really going to work for us. Let's take a look at some smaller ones. Found some sizes, the physical sizes that worked really well, approximately 68 by 44 inches. And let me just go on a little tangent here. There's a couple different kinds of panels. There's panels that go on houses that are UL rated, and they're way better. You don't want to get any 200 watt panels and put like 30 of them up. You don't want to get 100s by any stretch. You don't want to get these like flexibles. You want to get big, like UL rated, on house, top quality panels. They're cheaper, they're more powerful, they're easier to deal with, all the best research and development, all the best access, new technology, all the best warranties, everything. They're a little bit hard to get, but they're the only way. And that's what this one back here is, right? It's a 188 cell. It's the one that I was telling you about.
Oh, okay.
This is what the like next gen panel is, right? And they're like 64 by 44. It's 400 watts. That's what's going to fit 8 of those onto yours. So we could potentially get 3.2 kilowatts. And we're sort of going to go down the road trying to find you some of these. Like I said, they're brand new. They're next gen. They're sort of the next level stuff.
So come back to the middle so we can hear you. There we go. I think the biggest thing that everybody's like, well, that's great, the UL panel, can we get them through Light Harvest Solar, or where do we get them? And what brand do we get? We don't even know.
The thing is if they're commercial UL rated panels, right, they're all going to be within the realm. They're all going to be pretty competitive. The variations are going to be more efficient they are, the more you're going to pay. Brand wise, like I said, if they're UL rated, trying to compete in the world market, right? So they have to be good. It's not like these like 200 watt panels that are small manufacturers and stuff that are just for the RV market. Enormously competitive. I've never had anything that was UL rated that wasn't good. Brand tends to be one of the, like, probably the 4th or 5th or 6th sort of criteria I look at. I look at the physical size, I look at the efficiency of the panel, and make sure, and I really don't deal with that much that's not UL rated. If you're in a tiny home and you've got a big roof, that's absolutely the way you want to go.
All right, so Miles, that panel is obviously fantastic, obviously for my tiny house. However, right, people watching this are van lifers. So can they use a panel like that, or what I mentioned earlier, which was the Solaria panel, which I have used? Can you use something like that on a van? Can you use those big commercial grade panels on vans?
Yeah, that's all I use. It's for a bunch, all those reasons I said. You can, instead of putting 4 100s up and having to mount 4 panels, dealing with 4 connections, cutting a bunch of this and causing a big problem, and getting more expensive and not as good of panels, you just put one big one, a 430 or 400 or whatever you got, and call it good.
So if people can do the math quick enough, from it looks like I can fit 8 of those on my roof. The 108 cells, that one that's behind you. We're going to try and find me some, but if I can't find that exact panel, there's another panel on the market that I could possibly get.
This one right here.
That's a Solaria 400?
That's a Solaria. That's a Solaria. I think that's a 360, but these ones behind it are 400s. So yeah, we'll get you something. Solaria 400. And those are the two options. And at this point, Solaria was the top dog for a couple of years at least, but they're getting dethroned by these ones, in my opinion. When people ask how much solar do I need, the short answer is as much as you can get. Is by far the most effective way. It's your generation, right? So it's the cheapest and most effective bang for your buck. The minimum that you would be able to really be reasonable in your tiny home is going to be something in the realm of 2,000 watts, right? Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't even try to go below that. 3.2 kilowatts is a decent amount of power. In the wintertime, you might find that you need to use a generator every once in a while, but probably fairly minimal depending on what you end up doing. And that's also going to depend a lot on what you're running. The biggest thing that's going to draw you down fast is heat. You're using a diesel heater. A huge amount of power that it would take to run electrically is going to, you're not going to need to generate that. So 3.2 kilowatts is a great number for you. You've got a nice big battery bank.
Shout out to who I am using for heat, which is VanLife Tech, which is another good friend of yours, Troy. Not everybody has the luxury that I have to use a system like that for a tiny house, but most of the tiny houses that are even built are built to be plugged into grid. I guess I'm trying to go against the grain to say, okay, well, I want to go off grid. Or I want to make sure that I don't need to be plugged into grid. Can we segue into batteries now? Is that okay?
Sure, it's great.
Battery wise, I feel like, again, we could spend 60 minutes on every single topic, and we're trying not to do that. Battery wise, again, I got hooked up really nicely from my friends over at ReLion. I've been an ambassador for ReLion since the day is long. Miles knows ReLion really well. I love their battery. I love their BMS system. Is lithium is lithium? What are we talking about here?
Yeah, no.
Thank you.
Well, it's a quality. I've had total turd batteries. I mean, I've bought batteries. You buy the cheap one. Oh, that's a great deal. So you order it up, and it's like totally I've had straight dead batteries come to me, and they don't even work half the price, but still, and then you call the company and they don't do anything for you, and all kinds of stuff. If you don't know what you're going to get, you don't know what you're going to get. As a business owner, I only stick with stuff I know is good. And not only that I know is the best, Otherwise, I have to deal with a bunch of nonsense.
Back in the day, you actually carried ReLion. However, you have recently started branding your own batteries. We got our own now. You have your own.
We have our own being made, and we've got a 200 amp hour lithium, Bluetooth, 200 amp discharge, or 150 continuous discharge, 200 peak.
You don't carry a 48 volt, so I couldn't get my 48 volt battery off of you. So Thank you very much.
Sorry about that.
I know you're fine, because you know what? When I was shopping around for batteries, I did have a couple battery offers. I brought you 2 different companies that offered me 48 volt batteries, and you said, no doubt, go with the ReLions. And I asked for 2 of them. Which I thought was a little absurd, that I thought I was shooting for the moon. That's 30 kilowatt hours of battery. Did I get too much battery? Is there enough? Is that even a thing? What are you looking for when you size out a system?
Okay, so same deal with the batteries as your roof with your solar. The more the merrier. But the difference is lithium batteries are very, very expensive, right? You can't just go, I'll take 100 kilowatts or whatever. Most people, almost for sure, your budget is going to dictate it. And there does come a semi-absurd, about where you're at on yours is kind of the bottom end of what is absurd, right? Because if
I'm on the bottom end? Okay.
Well, yeah, because you've got let's say we get 3.2 kilowatts on there, and and you've got 30 kilowatt hours of batteries. It's going to take
2.5 days,
a day, a couple. But the reality of it is you don't really. Why would you want a battery bank that it takes a month to fill? One of the real important design criteria to try to get all the ratios just right. The ratio of the solar to the ratio of the battery to the ratio of the inverter size. If you get those off, you're just allocating your money to places that aren't the optimum. You tend to want to size it to where you can fill the battery every day or two on a good day, which is about where you are with the amount of solar we're thinking. Sorry, Jared, let me amend my calcs a little bit. We're looking more like two to 5 days. Yeah, I don't think you could get 30 kilowatt hours. That's 10 solar hours a day. You're probably more like four to five solar hours a day, right?
It's not like having a van where you have a DC to DC charger that you can charge your batteries from your alternator. You can't really do that in a tiny house. So you could, but
you could if you're traveling.
If you're traveling, right? But mine's a 24-foot tiny. I'm not going to be moving that sucker every day. Pretty much got the batteries taken care of. I do want to ask you, which has been this ongoing thing. Now, I also want to preface this with Miles goes to a ton of, expos and conferences and things like that in the off-grid world. He doesn't know I'm asking him this. We did a prep, but I wanted to make sure, I want to catch him off guard. Do you know anything about the carbon-based batteries supposedly are on the horizon that are coming out, or hydrogen, one of those? I forget what they are.
No, not much. I tend to not pay all that much attention till I can buy them. That's when I pay attention. There's a lot of battery tech coming. The biggest and most exciting thing about it is the money is going in now to the batteries, right? A lot of rapid advances in batteries. I give it 5 years. Solid state batteries, I think, are probably the most viable that are on the horizon.
So I don't want to make this an entire battery video, but I do have another question for you. What do you have to say to all the haters that are out there that lithium is bad for the environment, how it's mined and all that? Like, you can't get rid of it, you can't recycle it. What is that?
This was mined. This was mined.
Well, that's a lithium battery.
That was mined. This was mined. Everything in here was mined. All that stuff is absolutely true for every single thing that we have.
Can you recycle them yet, or can we recycle them yet?
Yeah, you can recycle them. I don't know that the economics are really there yet. The economics have to be in place. In other words, you have to be able to, it has to be worthwhile to suck that lithium out. Really, that, in my opinion, is the only good thing about not the only, but the lead acid batteries, you can recycle them pretty easy, but they're toxic and stuff like that. I just think that mostly that is just hate talk, and for the most part, pointing out valid concerns that exist well outside of lithium batteries.
So moving on, we've got the solar taken care of, especially for my tiny. We've got the batteries that were taken care of by somebody else. We're greatly appreciated to rely on. And thank you for helping me shop for that, Miles. But you needed those two things to kind of dictate the rest of the system. I've never done a 48-volt system before, so I have no idea what the heck to shop for. We spent a couple weeks kind of working together, talking about, Jared, what are you going to be running? What are you going to be using? I guess the biggest things is, guys, I'm going to be cooking everything off of electric. The only fossil fuel I'm going to be using, I guess, is diesel, and that's because I have a diesel heater, but it is electrically run through a fan. I have a 48-volt air conditioner that I'll be using, which is a Cruise & Comfort. Shout out to them. And those were the biggest questions you kind of had for me. Is that right?
Yeah. What are you going to be running? And we particularly want to pay attention to the big, powerful stuff, like air conditioning, like heat, like ovens, like that kind of stuff.
I got a washer dryer, but that's off of 120 volts, so it doesn't matter.
That matters because they take a lot of power. So we definitely want to know that. If you're running anything you're running off your batteries, we need to take into account. Things like lights, computers, phone don't take very much at all. Refrigeration is absolutely, you got to have it.
The refrigerator I'm planning on using is actually a yacht style or a van fridge, which is a company called Isotherm, which is, again, is a little unorthodox in the tiny house world, but I know that power consumption is energy efficient. I also wanted something under counter, and for the one I want, that one fit me the best. I did look up the amperage of my washer dryer today, by the way, and it runs 10 amps.
10 amps at 120? I mean, that's not that much. It's got to be a pretty small one, right?
It's one of those all-in-ones, which people are going to get on me for, but I really don't have space to do much else in my tiny house, right. Everybody. It's made by LG, which, they are running away with appliances these days. So
Right. Yeah, that's 1.2 kilowatts. That's way on the low side for a dryer. I might verify that because typically they're more like 3,000 to 5,000 watts.
apparently they use a heat pump.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Huh.
So, and that's maybe why they have their consumption.
Sure.
Now, I don't know. I'm not really sure.
That doesn't get run all that often, and you've got plenty of battery and plenty of solar. And that's the other thing we want to look at when we're deciding how much power we need is how long we're going to use something. You know, a heater you use all day, every day. A washer and dryer you use once every 3 or 4 days.
With somebody that is efficient as me, because I lived out of a van for as long as I did, I'm a minimalist. Yeah, it's one every like 7 days, brother.
Yeah, sure, right? But on the other hand, you're going to be cooking 3 meals a day, right? Using a lot of power. So we got to know that.
I'm a bachelor, so
or whatever.
Maybe 1 meal a day.
You know, microwave some ramen every day.
I've got the Brava oven. Again, shout out to those guys. I'm doing a lot of shout outs in this video. Brava oven, you know, that still pulls a lot of power. But yeah, we can reheat some stuff there. Yeah. Talk to me, what is next in your mind? What happens? Where you go?
Sure. Okay. So that now that we've figured out the panels and the batteries, we know most of what we need to know. The next thing is, like you were talking about, figure out the loads. That is going to dictate how big your inverter is going to be. And that's going to be the next step, is your inverter. The one thing that people never talk about that's very important is when you turn an inverter on, it sucks down a ton of power as soon as it's on, right? So you don't want to get an inverter that's too big. You don't want to get like a 10,000 watt inverter when you only need a 5, right? Because it's going to suck away a lot of your power. And especially in bad conditions, it'll do it. You know, it'll take a ton. Most vans and things like that, we recommend a 3,000, and that'll get the job done. 3,000 watt. For you, we're going to do a 5,000 watt inverter. I probably wouldn't go much more than 6,000. 5,000 is plenty. When and then you start to get into the 7, 8, 9, 10. If you're maybe trying to heat the joint, and you've got a huge battery bank and a huge solar panel.
3,000 watt typically is your standard for vans, which is fantastic. For mine, you're looking at a tiny house, which is 5,000. However, in a van, it's not always on. You usually have a switch to turn it on or off. In my tiny, I'm going to be having that on 24/7. It is always going to be running. Is that really like, that's what you were talking about? Like, that's going to have a draw on it. Just it's sitting still by itself. Like, if I haven't already, I've probably already showed Miles's website, the Light Harbor Solar website. You actually did tell me that you were thinking about getting the 5,000 watt inverter put onto your website. Because it's not on there for everybody to see. Is it going to be the Multi Plus or the Quattro is what it was?
Quattro. Yeah, Victron Quattro.
Mm-hmm. Is there a difference between the Multi Plus and the Quattro? Like, I don't know.
They don't make a Quattro in 48 volt 120.
So it has to be a 48 volt inverter.
Yeah, absolutely. The voltage of the inverter has to match the voltage of the battery. Has to match the voltage of the charge controller.
Okay, and is that easy to figure out? You just read the numbers and it just like this is the novice we're talking about over here.
Yeah, 48V.
All right.
Look for 48V.
Victron, now obviously on your website you have everything, either Victron or Kotek, which you love as well. Victron also now sells an all-in-one. What I mean by an all-in-one is a charge controller and inverter charger in one. By the way, I am going with an inverter charger, everybody, because I want to have the capability of plugging into shore power for that, you know, just in case, I guess, right? Are we getting am I buying off of you the all-in-one with the charge controller installed inside of it?
You know, I haven't. I looked at the availability of that a minute ago, and I didn't see it. So we kind of went down another road. But honestly, I haven't checked it in that last day or two. We'll have to. I'll have to look a little closer.
Is there any, you know, advantages or disadvantages of having or not having?
Yeah, they're easier. I mean, you don't have to run like 2 wires.
Okay.
Some fuses and stuff like that. It's slightly easier.
I mean, it's newer technology. I think they just started doing this. It's kind of cool.
But we'll check price and capability and all that kind of stuff, right?
I mean, even on your website, it looks like a 3,000 watt, you know, Victron Multi Plus is actually pretty cheap. You're only $1,285, really?
Okay. That's what it says.
That's what it says.
But that's actually a pretty good segue into the one of the really good advantages of 48 volt, because with a 48 volt system, you can get a charge controller that is 1/4 the size of a 12 volt charge controller. So in other words, we're going to get you, the math comes down to is 3,200 watts divided into 48 volts is 66 amps. So we need to get like a 70 amp charge controller. But if we were to do yours at 12 volts, we would have to get 4 of those 70 amp charge controllers.
And wire them,
wire tons of nonsense. It's very difficult, right?
Right.
You have to wire 4 charge controllers, 4 sets of wires into a bus bar that's all common, and total nightmare, right? So you save yourself a bunch of money and a bunch of headache, and you get better performance, because the higher the voltage is, the better it transmits electricity. You use much smaller wires. You save a bunch of money there. You get a lot of advantage to it.
According to your website, I'm on it right now, it looks like they do have a 150-70, which the 70 is the 70 amp, which is the MPPT. What is that 150? What is that number?
That's the voltage, right?
Okay.
And that's the input voltage. And we're going to have to go, which is another, I mean, if we're going to get super technical, this is one of the things that we do, right? That gets above and beyond the skill set of most people, is to design this. 150 volts is the highest voltage that charge controller will use, right? And you've got 8 solar panels that are about 40 volts each, right? There's 2 configurations you can use with 8 solar panels. You can put 2 in series and 4 in parallel, or 2 in parallel and 4 in series. It's easier to do 4 in series and 2 in parallel. That's a total of 8 panels. But that gets the voltage up to 40 times 4, which is 160. It's above that 150. And so we need to bump to a 250 amp, the 250 volt charge controller. So it's a 250-70 that we would use. So
if you scroll further down, I see a 250-100. Obviously, they do make a 250-70 somewhere in the realm.
It's just a little bit uncommon. And that's what we, that's why, that's what we do, is we say, hey, this is going to be 5% better for you, this particular product, right? Which it probably would be 3 to 5% better. You could use that 150-70, but then you'd have to do 2 parallel for, it would be 4 series, 2 parallel, right? I'm sorry. Did you see what it gets complicated?
It gets confusing.
I haven't confused myself.
It's so confusing.
It would be 2 series, 4 parallel, which would put the voltage at about 80 volts, which is a little low for 48. But so anyway, it can get complex. But we want to bump the voltage up with 4 panels in series up to about 160 and use a 250 volt charge controller.
Miles, you lost me at hello. You made it this far into the video. This is why it is super important to kind of listen and pay attention. Probably going to go with either the 250, the 100, or the 250, the 70, whatever it is, I'm going to go with it. After charge controls, I did ask you, for vans, it's very different, but for the tiny house, I was talking about AC, DC distribution panels. And you were like, Jared, just go to the hardware store and get you a standard AC panel, which is what you'd have in my house, like anybody, like a house, right?
Any house.
I was talking to my father about this today, and he's like, well, what amperage panel are you going to get? And I was like, I don't know. I got to talk to Miles.
Generally, they're all pretty high. You're not going to necessarily need to get a big one, because you're not going to have a ton of circuits, because you're going to have and you're going to be limited on space. 5,000 watts is like 42 amps or something like that. So the bare minimum would be a 50 amp.
I was actually talking to him, and actually he was saying, I was like, yeah, if I got like 12 positions for the breakers, he's like, those are standard 60 amp panels.
Perfectly adequate. Okay,
cool. See, guys, I'm learning as we kind of talk here, which is fantastic. So we've got inverter and solar charge controller kind of taken care of. Either we do it all in one, or we do it 2 separate. Again, you're going to provide me with that amazing wire diagram regardless. After I do that, what else am I looking at, man? Because what else are we missing here?
Yeah, okay, so from there we start to talk about the real finite details. And again, it gets into why we have a job, is because we know how to size wires. Since you're doing a 48 volt system, you can use wires a quarter the size. There's charts all over the internet that tell you exactly what size wire you use, but wires are kind of like blood vessels. There's big ones go into the stuff that needs a lot. There's little ones go into the stuff that doesn't need a lot. So you kind of got to know what needs a lot, what doesn't need a lot, right? Your oven is going to need a lot, so you need to have a wire that's appropriate. We figure out the wire size. We also figure out the fuses or the breakers. We figure out the lugs, and the lugs have to fit the studs that they're going on to. And there's a lot of little detail work that isn't really tough, but it's got to know how to do it. You know what I mean? It's not that much fun to buy a bunch of stuff and then you get home and nothing fit. The lugs don't fit the studs. The other one thing that I wanted to quick note is that your heater pumps and things like that run on 12 volts. So we're going to have to get a 48 volt to 12 volt converter.
Yeah.
Right?
It's a step down, right?
The step down, which is one of the reasons why 12 volt, just going straight 12 volt is nice. Vehicles, you don't have to deal with that extra component. With what you're doing, we're just going to have to do it.
So I asked you an important question earlier. Do I need to have a separate, DC panel for 48 volt and a separate DC, like fuse block, I should say?
No. Well, you don't need a 48 volt one because you're not going to be running anything at 48.
I am one thing.
What?
AC.
Oh, that's right. Okay. We'll have to keep that in mind. It's a design thing. It's not going to take me very, very long to deal with it.
Real quick here before we kind of end this, Miles, I can't thank you enough. I also want to point out, Miles, you have a completely off-grid office.
Oh, yeah.
Your office is 100% off-grid in the mountains of Colorado. I'm not going to say exactly where, but the mountains of Colorado. You run an entire business out of this.
Yeah. I do, and it's 10,000 feet up, and it's stormy and nasty. Luckily, it's pretty sunny, but we're running heat out of it and everything. I have to come inside sometimes, but for the most part, we're a year and a month in, little over that.
That is why I trust this man with everything that I am doing off-grid wise, because he literally lives that off-grid lifestyle. So he sells it, he lives it. Miles, thank you so much. I cannot, again, thank you enough for this.
Sure.
Any parting words you want to say before we end this?
No, yeah, just thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk about it, and hopefully people will clear it up a little for folks.
I could run through the fire, I could conquer the night, if I can make it, if